Hi everyone and welcome back. This is Alexander Lim and we are on another episode of Author Story. Our featured book is The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You. Command an audience and sell your way to success, which you can check out by clicking on the Amazon link in the video description below. The author, Lydia Fenet, is the Managing Director and Global Director of Strategic Partnerships at Christie's, and she has helped raise over $500 million for over 400 nonprofits worldwide. So, Lydia, welcome to Author Story. Thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, Lydia, first off, what made you decide to write The Most Powerful Woman in the Room? Was it something you decided to write because of an aha moment you had, or was it something like, it's a slow burn over several years?
It was a slow burn over several years. About
Okay.
5 or 6 years ago was when I really first started thinking about it.
Okay. Go ahead.
But I really started thinking about it about 5 or 6 years ago, and I had been on stage one night taking an auction at a charity for an organization called Room to Grow. And at the end of the auction, Uma Thurman, the actress, and her agent came up to me and said, "We'd like to take you out for breakfast.
Okay.
We'd like to talk to you about what you could do with this skill." And I'd had that conversation with a number of people over the years. People would come up to me and say, "I think that you should have a reality show," or,
Okay.
they would always have a suggestion for something that I could do, but I'd never really sat down and thought about what I wanted to do.
Right.
And so the night before that breakfast, I sat down and came up with a list of things. And that was actually the first time I ever talked about writing a book. And at the top of my list said, write a book about selling to women, and not to women, but for women. And we had the breakfast, and then no one at the breakfast knew at that point, but I was pregnant with my first child.
Okay.
And it's amazing how quickly 4.5 years can pass when you have 3 children.
Right.
And so I found myself, 4.5 years later, walking down the street when a New York Times reporter called and asked if she could write a day in the life piece, because I have kind of an unusual job. I work at Christie's during the day running a department that I started for the company called Strategic Partnerships.
Right.
And then I go home and I put my children to bed, and then I go back out at night and take charity auctions. So I like to say I have a day shift and a night shift to my life. And the night that she followed me, I finished up everything. And the last question the reporter asked me was, "What do you do when you get off stage at 11 o'clock at night and you go home?" And I said, "Well, I either read books because I don't want to turn on any kind of TV because it'll keep me awake, or I write this book that I've been thinking about writing for many years." And truth be told, I hadn't written that much of it at that point. I think I had sort of one chapter written, but I had in my mind what I thought it should say. And so when I saw the transcript with those words, I said to myself, I either have to write this book or I need to stop talking about it, because I've been talking about it for a long time, but I haven't done anything.
Right.
And so I knew that the piece was coming out about 6 weeks later, and I wrote the proposal and I sent it to my best friend's literary agent, who agreed to post it on her social media the day that the New York Times piece came out. And she did. And I had 4 publishing houses reach out to meet. And then I sold it at the end of that week to Simon & Schuster, which is actually in the same building that I've worked in for 20 years. So I feel like it was all supposed to happen. And that was it. They gave me 3 months to write it. So I really dug deep for 3 months and wrote 1,000 words a day, every single day. But at the end of it, I had my book, and now here I am.
All right, cool. So before anything else, I'd just like to get clear, just for our audience, for our listeners, what your book is about. Is it all about sales and selling, or is it more than that?
So it's sort of part memoir and life lessons through a 20-year career, but it applies to everyone. And, I did write it as The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You, but I've had a lot of male friends read it and say to me time and time again, these tips are all applicable, male or female. I just felt like I had a very unique perspective because I had done the job of an auctioneer, which is historically a very male role, for many years. So I figured that was who I was writing for. That was my audience. But the book is really about a number of different things. I think life lessons, number one, that I've learned over a 20-year career. Number two, there are sales tips. There's also public speaking tips. But more than anything, it's really about finding confidence in your voice and how I found the confidence in my voice on stage and yet wasn't applying it to my everyday life. So I would stand on stage at Madison Square Garden with someone like Bruce Springsteen, just pinching myself the whole time and feel totally in control and in command and asking everybody for money and making it fun and all of these things. And then I would come back to my job and not ask for something or not negotiate a salary or not push for something that I believed I deserved. And I wanted to shore those things up. And that was the evolution of the book. And that's really the way that it ended up. You know, each chapter has a sentence: the most powerful woman in the room, ... knows you are what you negotiate. And I talk about how I learned that lesson and ultimately how I negotiated to get the salary that I deserved. So it's an interesting but also fun read. So there are definitely tips and takeaways in every single chapter, but it's written like a story, the story of my life and how I've learned these lessons.
All right. So these stories and these lessons, I mean, they draw on years of your experience, and on years of your experience then.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, the nice thing about having been in a company for 20 years is I've had sort of a blank canvas that I can chart the successes and failures along the way, because it's been the one constant has been the backdrop, right? So it's really how I'm reacting to that. And I've been able to really see how things have worked and how they haven't worked. And I've had the trust of my colleagues and my company behind me to make these mistakes along the way. So it's been great. It's been great. And it's amazing to work at a company that's been so supportive of this book as well.
All right. Okay. Cool. So do note that. Let's get a little bit in the topic. So you do note that selling can help women stand out in both their career and their personal life. Uh, why would you mention this? I mean, don't women do this naturally?
You know, that's the funny thing. I don't think that we do. I think we have the skills to do it, but for some reason, there's something in rejection and fear that I think is just inherent in women. I don't know if it's the way that the culture around us has made us feel or the way that we are brought up, but I see this with all of my friends that, you know, they're scared to go in and ask for more money because they feel like it's emotional, or they're worried about what someone will think of them for asking for something. And, you know, what I always say to the women in my life, and also in the book many times, is emotion needs to be taken out of business and negotiation. They are two completely separate things. If you were negotiating for something, you were negotiating for a business. It's not about whether or not you're liked. And we need to remember that. And I have 2 brothers and a sister. And it's interesting because my parents always said we could do whatever we wanted. But for some reason, my brothers are very comfortable having those conversations, whereas both my sister, my mom, and me always would sort of shy away from them. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing or what it is, but it really is something that I see time and time again. And even in my own team at work, I say to them all the time, like, you should come in and talk to me about what you want salary-wise, because even if I can't give it to you, it's good for you to ask, because you need to get over the fear of asking.
All right. Okay. Okay. So I just sorry, what's this? I just get your input on something that a lot of folks might find somewhat lacking in fields of sales and marketing, which is the truth or even authenticity. Now I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people out there cynical about what's being offered. Like, yeah, right, get rid of my pimples in 2 seconds flat, just like on TV.
Right.
But how important is telling the truth when it comes to selling?
It's so important. And I have a hilarious story in the book that any of your readers will probably chuckle when they hear it, but I talk about being sold a house rental at an auction by the best salesperson in the world. I basically sold myself a trip to a place that I'd never seen, that I'd never been, I'd never heard of. But I read the description and immediately in my mind thought it was going to be this glorious vacation rental house that I was going to rent for my husband's birthday. And it turned out to be literally the set of a horror movie.
Okay.
And it was such a lesson to me, because I get on stage and I've been given these notes and I make sure that I research what I'm about to say, because if that happens to somebody else, not me, that I've sold to, then the next year when they come back, they will have told all of their friends about that experience and nobody will believe a word that I say on stage. So it's very important, because you burn the bridge, and you not only burn the bridge, but you burn the bridge to every person that knows the person whose bridge was burned. And so I always say that the equation is, if someone has a good experience, they'll tell 1 person. If they have a bad, they'll tell 9. So just remember that in sales. It's a true equation, and you really can see it easily. Anytime someone's had a bad experience, all they want to do is talk about it. If they've had a good experience, they might mention it. So keep that in mind if you're in sales.
Right. Okay. And I mean, there's also I know kind of like a flip side and underside to this is that sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about the truth. It's uncomfortable to sell what's truthful.
Yes.
How might you work around that to bring the message out?
Well, I do think that there's a lot of sales is listening, right? You want
Okay.
people always come into meetings and sales, even the meetings that I have, and they're jumping out of the gate to tell me about everything that this thing that they want to sell is going to do. And what I always say to the people that I'm training is sales is actually about listening. People don't realize that, but the truly good salesperson is the person who sits back and takes note of what the other person is saying and then weaves their sales pitch into what that person is saying. So it's a conversation. It's not a one-sided information coming out of someone out of a fire hose. It's really about a two-way conversation. And so what I think is if you have something difficult to sell, you need to also figure out what you're selling and whom you're selling to, what is going to appeal to them, and then be truthful about the pitfalls of what you're selling. Because again, you could sell something and have a huge sale with someone, but
Right.
if they have money to spend and you've given them something false, they're never going to come back to you. So it's worth it to just be upfront about the pitfalls because that really is what's going to make somebody come back to you time and time again in sales.
So, like, even if I'm sure you probably experienced this, but I mean, even if you do tell them the pitfalls, be truthful with them, that means that it occurs to me then that means that you have kind of like a reputation with that other person, like this guy's going to tell the truth, or this woman's going to tell the truth.
Yeah, of course. And just think about it. Again, I go back to the book. I did sales coaching for some of the sort of top fashion brands in the world. And I said to them, you have this amazing fur coat that is going to, you're going to get the commission that's going to pay your rent. And this woman comes in and she looks absolutely terrible in it. And you convince her to buy it. So that's fine. You've gotten your commission check. There you go. That woman will go home and someone will eventually tell her she looks absolutely horrible in that coat. And the problem is, that woman probably has tons of money to burn, but she's never going to burn that money with you again because you've burned that bridge. And so it just always goes back to like, think about the long game in sales. It doesn't have to be the short sale. It can be the longer version. And in that longer version, you want to be in the picture time and time again.
All right, okay, okay. So maybe this relates to truthfulness, but you mentioned something about authenticity and how it helps sell things. What is it about authenticity then that enables this sort of thing to happen?
So I talk about in the book where I had this moment of realization because when I trained to be an auctioneer, I was 24 and I was a woman, and everyone I trained with was much older than me. And the really talented, incredible auctioneers for Christie's were older gentlemen who were all British. So whenever I got up to sell, I would emulate their style, which, as you can imagine, was kind of hilarious because I'm not British, but I think I was affecting a little bit of a British accent. So
Right, right,
after years and years of doing this and not finding particular success, like the audience wasn't really reacting to what I was doing, I was very, very sick one day and I got on stage just not really feeling like I could play anyone but myself.
right, right.
And so I sort of started talking to the audience in the way that I might talk to a friend and really bringing them into the lot that I was selling. It was a cocktail party and it was an amazing art collection and you were going to have this wonderful time. But the interesting thing was that the woman who was in charge of selling or giving that lot to the auction in probably 3 or 4 months prior to that had been seated next to me at a lunch where my boyfriend had broken up with me and I'd cried the whole lunch and
Okay.
she sat next to me handing me napkins and wine and chocolate and just could not have been sweeter, just really trying to sort of help me through this horrible moment in my life.
Right.
And so as I was standing up looking at the crowd, I saw her and I said to the crowd, yes, you're going to have this amazing moment for cocktails at her house and you're going to see her incredible art collection. But more importantly, this woman is Oprah. You don't realize she nursed me through a bad breakup. I've never had such good advice in my life. And it was the first time that instead of me selling as this is a cocktail party for 20 people, you're going to have a
Right.
great time,
Right.
people all of a sudden were, everyone in that crowd probably had been through a breakup and I'm sure they leaned on someone. And so all of a sudden this story had legs. And that's what I mean by authenticity, because all of a sudden the audience was engaged. So even when I go into meetings for work, because I pitch Christie's brand constantly, I really try to understand who's sitting across the table. I get to know them. And then I weave that into the storyline because that feels authentic. That's the way that I sell. So I say to people, like, really think about what it is in your personality that people are going to be drawn to and who you really are. If you have a good sense of humor, like throwing in a joke every once in a while during a negotiation is always a good tactic for getting people back on track.
Right, right. I mean, what I'm getting from this is, don't be someone you're not, because eventually people are going to twig on it.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it's so much easier to sell when you're acting like yourself because you're not having to put on any show. You can just be you.
All right, okay. So I'd like to go into a couple more things. First off, you mentioned something about a strike method when you in
Mhm.
sales. What is this, and why is this so important?
So I learned this when I was getting up on stage taking auctions where I would go in front of a group. You have to remember I'm not taking art auctions. I'm not standing up in front of people, in an evening gown selling Picassos. I'm getting on stage at sort of 9 or 10, 11 o'clock at night at a cocktail party or a dinner where people most of the time don't even know that there's going to be an auction to raise money for an organization. They just think they're there for the party. And so
Okay.
at first, when I started taking it, I couldn't really get people's attention because they'd been drinking. There were so many of them. And so I brought the gavel and I started slamming the gavel down. And what I realized is when I slammed the gavel down, people would turn and look at me. And then I had 30 seconds to engage them, to say something that made them feel like they were going to have a great time and be involved. And that's really where it came from. And so I say in business, and I say this to my team when we go into a boardroom, you always want to have a moment where you sort of pause before you start a sale and then have your first line lined up. You need to know what you're going to say going into any sale so that you catch the attention of the people sitting across the table and so that they're engaged from the first minute. They feel like you're going to hold their attention. So don't just go in there. There's nothing I hate more than sitting in a meeting where someone is turning red because they're so flustered, because they're nervous, because they haven't thought about what they're going to say before they open their mouth. So when I first started taking auctions, it was like rote memory. Every time the gavel hit, I would say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lydia Fenet. I'm here from Christie's Auction House." And then I would launch into the next sentence. But no matter how nervous I was, the minute that gavel hit the podium, I went straight into that line. And that just made me feel better. And now every time I get up there, I hit the gavel down, I say that, and then I throw in a joke, whatever comes to mind at the time. So again, you'll have your own strike method, but
Right.
it's a moment of calm and then you move forward. So come up with your own and then use it time and time again. And I promise it will ease your nerves in any sale.
Okay. All right. Now, in sales, I'll go into this a little bit into this about sales. In sales, there are such things as scripting. Like you should say this when you talk to a client, stuff like that. In, in your opinion, does scripting work? I mean, does it help the person relate?
I think, like, again, you need to bring in your authentic self with the script. I mean, there's nothing worse than the telemarketer who calls and says really quickly into the phone, "How is your day today?" You're like, you don't
Yes.
care about my day. Like, let's
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
So I say, especially, and again, there are exceptions to this because if you were working in a call center, there will be certain things that you will not be able to do if you are
Right.
truly scripted. But for the sort of average salesperson who has a small business, like, do research before you get on the phone with someone. Google is an amazing thing, and you can find out where people went to university or not, or if they started a business, or where they live, or if they have children, and try to relate on a personal level. I always say when I go into meetings, if I see that the person sitting across from me has grandchildren, then I always laugh and say I might as well just pull up a chair because the minute you throw out the word grandchildren, you could be there for 2 hours. But
Right.
you have to just know a little bit about the person across from you because it just makes it a better relationship all around. And it makes sales a lot easier if people feel like they like you and you're invested in their life.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Got that. Got that. Okay. So I'd also like to ask you a little bit about the big boogeyman, which you probably mentioned earlier before in this interview. Failure, the big F word in sales.
Yes.
How does this actually help someone succeed?
So I always like to say that failure is like exercise. The more you do it, the better you get. It's not always pleasant. You don't always want to have to do it, but you do it and you're better because of it. And that's the same thing with rejection. You just have to keep going. One of the most amazing women I met actually worked at a call center, and she said to me once, I've been rejected over 10,000 times, and I like to think that I'm bulletproof. And it made me laugh so hard because it's really such a visual, because once you get rejected, you just stop caring that the answer is no, because you're not worried about it anymore. And once you lose the fear of saying no, then you're willing to ask for anything. And I think that that is probably the most important thing that you're going to see of the people who are successful. I mean, the powerful women in the book who did the case studies, people like Barbara Corcoran, who talks about getting rejected by Shark Tank before going back to them and saying that she wants another try, and flies out to LA and nails it. And then, it's been 10 years for her on Shark Tank. Like, every person who's at the top of their career will tell you that failure was one of the reasons that they ended up where they are today. They didn't get something that they thought they were going to get, and as a result, this is where they are. This is where they are. And again, it's not, look, and I say this honestly, it's not like it ever feels great to be rejected. Even when I was asking women for case studies in the book, there were a number of them that came back and said, they couldn't do it because they had other obligations, or frankly, there were just some people who've never emailed back. And that doesn't feel great. But I remember thinking to myself after I got the first rejection, well, at least I know what it feels like. And now next time it won't feel so bad. So you just can't let it stop you from asking, because that's really the most important thing. You'd be surprised at how much people want to help when you ask for help. So just ask. Ask the question. Don't be scared, and don't worry about what other people think of you.
Right. Okay. So let's just say you came across someone starting out at work. Maybe someone's just looking at a job. Maybe someone's out to cut a career in sales. And you had only enough time to tell that person one thing about to achieve his or her goal. Like in sales, to sell themselves for a job or whatever. What would be that one thing you would tell them?
I would tell them to separate emotion from selling, and to remember what I've talked about this entire interview. There are two different things. There is emotion and there is business. Think of business as something and do not apply any emotion to it. Do not worry about getting rejected. Make the ask.
All right. Well, great words right there. And I guess for someone who's starting out, those would probably that'd probably be a tough thing to do.
Yeah, but again, you have to practice. You can't get better at anything without practice.
True. Okay. So, Lydia, about this book, I mean, we've gone over this book. I mean, it's kind of like sales, kind of like self-help, But
Yep.
in truth, there are a lot of books out there on sales and self-help. Is there anything that you might think of that would make someone want to get this book? Like they see it in the bookshelf in the bookstore, and they'd see it and they'd say, "I'm going to get this book."
Well, first of all, the cover is amazing. It's hot pink. It's sassy. It feels great. So pick it up. But truthfully, what people have asked me this question before: what sets this book apart? I have a unique skill set. I have been on stage for the past 16 years as an auctioneer for Christie's. I take 70 to 100 auctions a year, which means that I've been on over 1,000 stages with enough script to fill about 3 minutes and then 45 minutes of dead air. So I've had so much time to experiment with what works and what doesn't work. And I feel like in this book, that is what I'm trying to show you. So not only do I want it to motivate and inspire you, but I want you to understand what sales looks like in a fun and interesting way that's going to make you feel like you can walk out the door and start tomorrow, whether you're negotiating with a contractor in your home or selling a small business, or frankly, just selling your vision to someone, selling an idea. This will help you do that. And it will also, hopefully, I think, make you feel great in the process.
All right. Well, all right. Great. That's great. Those are great points right there. So, Lydia, in the last minute or so of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share to inspire some of our listeners?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from writing this book was I always used to think that somebody else was going to realize that I was really good at something and promote me or advocate for me. And what I've realized in life, and even through writing this book, is that no one can advocate for you the way that you can advocate for you. And that's why I call the book The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You, because I truly believe that once you believe in yourself, you are unstoppable. So stop looking around for everybody else to tell you what you want to do and what you already know that you can do.
Okay, well, great words right there. So, in closing then, the book is The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You, Command an Audience and Sell Your Way to Success. The author is our guest, Lydia Fenet. And you can find her book on Amazon. So, Lydia, thank you very much for being an author story. I must say it was very interesting speaking with you.
And well, thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for having me. I absolutely love your program. So I'm really appreciative that you take the time to interview me.
You're welcome. You're welcome, and appreciate the appreciate the comment. So everyone, particularly the powerful ladies out there, by all means, check out the most powerful woman in the room is you, and also go ahead and check out some of our other books and authors which we've already covered on Author Story. And of course, go ahead and subscribe to our channel if you want. So see you guys all next time on Author Story, where we speak to another great author about another awesome book.